Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video, we'll be talking about Ford's sales. Now, I am going to make several other videos talking about the sales with other automakers, so if you want to see more videos like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content like this on a regular basis. And then also, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. Let's just dive right into it. So we're going to be going over Ford's Q2 sales for 2023. And, well, let's start with the big headline figure. Between the Ford and the Lincoln brand, there was almost 530,000 vehicles sold. This is a 10% increase year over year, which on the surface sounds very positive, but once you dive into the numbers, you see exactly what's happening, and that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. So when you look at the Ford brand year over year, 11% increase, whereas with the Lincoln brand, things have slightly decreased. There's definitely a softening with that brand. Now, in terms of the models from Ford that have had, some pretty big gains, the F-Series pickup trucks posted a 34% increase, which makes sense because last year it was really hard to just get anything. And so, you'd hope that you have an increase, especially with pickup trucks. They were pretty hard to get last year. And then, some other vehicles that did well: Bronco Sport, Transit, Edge, Escape, Expedition, and Maverick were also really strong. The vehicles that did not do very well were the electric Fords, and then also the Bronco, Explorer, and the Mustang, the regular Mustang. So not only is the Mach-E struggling, but then the sports car Mustang is struggling. But something to mention is, obviously we've got the 24 Mustang, which I don't think any have been delivered quite yet. And so that is probably a reason as to why people aren't buying the current Mustang, the 23s, because everyone wants the 24 because it's a big change right there. And then on the Lincoln side of things, like I said, this brand was definitely struggling a little bit more. So it says down 15% overall, which is pretty crazy. Now, the Navigator in the Lincoln brand still was pretty strong with sales. It is the Aviator and also the Corsair that are kind of pulling the brand down when it comes to overall sales figures. The Navigator and the Nautilus are kind of carrying things, especially the Navigator. That vehicle is selling quite well. So as we can see so far with this report, right, the Lincoln brand seems to just be struggling, and it doesn't have a lot of cars. It's also, not a lot of volume overall for the Ford brand, so it's not super important. And then on the Ford side of things, well, the vehicles that are selling are Ford's, less expensive vehicles outside of the Expedition. That one obviously is a more expensive vehicle. And the vehicles that aren't selling are the electric vehicles, and then the slightly more expensive vehicles / vehicles that, have, new models coming out. Well, I just realized after the first section of the video, I forgot to mention this report comes from Cox Automotive, so we got to make sure we have that. Anyways, we're not going to talk about market share. So Ford's market share, 12.8%. This is the lowest it's been since 2021 when it was 10.7%. And, Ford usually is in that 13 to 14% range with market share. So their market share is definitely slipping. And this is happening at the same time that Ford is spending more money on incentives. Their incentive spend right now is just over $2,000 per vehicle. Now, prior to the pandemic, their average incentive spend was over $4,000 per vehicle. So they're still not up to pre-pandemic levels in terms of incentive spend, but they are having to spend more money to convince people to buy their product. But this is happening at the same time that their average transaction prices are still up year over year. So even though Ford is technically discounting their vehicles more, the actual sales price on these vehicles is still higher than what it was last year. And again, we're at all-time heights in terms of prices. And on top of that, Ford has been pretty aggressive with, some price increases with some of their vehicles that are in higher demand, like the Bronco, for example. And I think that's a big reason as to why, Bronco sales, outside of the production issues, but, could be slumping, is just because Ford is pricing people out of the market. I mean, you look at the Bronco Raptor, for example, when that vehicle was initially released, a fully decked out one was like, around, I think like $80,000 to $85,000. Now it's almost $100,000. And that's, of course, before the pesky dealer markups, which we'll talk about that at the end of the video. But in this average transaction price section, the thing that I find fascinating is the average transaction price for an F-Series pickup truck. $66,000. That's about the same exact price of the average transaction price of a luxury car. The F-Series pickup truck is not a luxury car, but Ford, on average, is asking luxury car prices for it. And on top of that, the Ford Maverick, which had an average transaction price of around or under $30,000, is now above $30,000. So even that is getting more expensive. So what this basically shows is that if Ford has a vehicle that is not in high demand, they've got incentives on it. If a vehicle is in high demand, they don't have incentives on it. And on top of not having incentives, they're increasing the prices on that product. Now we're gonna quickly dive into my thoughts on this and then what this means for Ford moving forward. So first off, with that incentive spend, something that needs to be mentioned is a lot of that is going towards their fully electric vehicles. So the Mustang Mach-E and the Ford F-150 Lightning, and that is because these vehicles aren't selling well. And I find this a pretty interesting story because if you remember when those vehicles were initially, announced and released, there was apparently tons of hype behind the vehicles and they were sold out for years. And now all of a sudden we're in a situation where Ford now has a day supply number with these vehicles that looks like it's going to take years to sell them. So it's just been a complete flip-flop with those vehicles. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens with Ford and fully electric moving into the future. And this is something that we need to talk about with these other manufacturers as well, because it's kind of a trend across the automotive industry where, their regular ICE cars are selling quite well, and then their, EVs are not selling well. Even if they discount them massive amounts, it seems like they're still struggling to sell them. And so, I think that this is going to put, some uncertainty to Ford's future when it comes to, the electrification of things with the brand. Because if Ford can, have a factory churning out ICE cars that are selling for big profits versus churning out these electric cars that they're losing money on, what makes more sense from a business perspective? So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. And then when it comes to kind of my overall thoughts on this situation, I think that Ford is losing market share, not because of what's happening with their electric cars, but because of what's happening with some of their ICE cars. Now, I, can kind of understand the price increases with some of the more specialty type vehicles like, the Broncos, the Raptors, all of that kind of stuff. But the F-Series pickup truck, for example, that is Ford's biggest volume seller. And for that to have an average transaction price of $66,000, I think that makes absolutely no sense, because pickup trucks are utility vehicles that are supposed to be available for the masses. And that's what, Ford has, apparently done for the last, 50 years or so. And that's just not reality anymore. $66,000 is not affordable for the average American. Again, that is the average price of a luxury car. And this is a pickup truck that's supposed to be used for, pickup truck type stuff. So, I think that would be the one thing out of Ford's entire portfolio that I would change the most, is to lower the prices or increase the incentive spend on these F-Series pickup trucks. Now, again, I understand, some of the special packages like the high output Power Stroke and all that kind of stuff that's selling well. I understand, not discounting that. But, F-150 XLTs, that's a truck that is not a specialty in any way, right? It's mass produced. It shouldn't be over $60,000. So that's the one thing that I would do. And that would not only help Ford regain some of their market share, but I think that it would help them make quite a bit of money, because they would play the game of just selling more units. You're making less profit per unit, but you're selling more units. And so overall, you make more profit. Anyways, let me know what you guys think about this situation with Ford, and let me know what you would like to see from Ford as a customer, because there's obviously a lot of stuff happening with the brand when it comes to, production issues, pricing, and then, obviously certain vehicles not selling. It's kind of all over the place. I think it's one of the most unique situations in the automotive industry, because it's so split. It's like within one brand, you have some cars that are selling for huge premiums over MSRP, the Raptors, and at the same time, you have cars that are selling for way under MSRP with the electric cars and with some of the pickup trucks and everything. And then at the same time, you have other cars that, they're just basically selling for MSRP. I just don't think you see as big of a split in a brand as you do with Ford. Everyone else seems to be a little bit more consistent with their pricing in the real world. So I guess that shows that Ford needs to kind of figure things out with production and kind of level things out. So I guess the buying experience would be a little bit better. Anyways, I'll see you.